Hi guys, Nick Jennison for Guitar Interactive. On the test bench today, we're taking a look at the Roesner Capo 75 acoustic guitar amplifier. Roesner is a former designer from AER. You'll probably recognize this format from AER's acoustic amplifiers. We know how highly respected they are, and this is the design mastermind behind them. It's a 75 watt Class AB analog acoustic guitar amplifier, so it's not a Class D digital amp, it is straight up Class AB analog with 2 channels, 6 effects built in, and this custom 8-inch kind of like dual cone driver. So it's like a dual concentric driver, but it's not quite your typical kind of woofer and tweeter sort of setup. Now, in the intro, you heard me playing straight into channel 1. Let's take a look at the top panel, and then we'll do a little more playing. We'll talk about what's going on in the back panel. We'll explore some of the effects, some of the features that are on board. But first, like I say, let's take a look across the top panel. So starting up here in the back panel, we have 2 combi jack and XLR inputs, which means if you're using an acoustic guitar with like an undersaddle pickup, like this Faith guitar we're using today, that's going to plug straight into a jack. But if you're using something like an upright bass with an XLR output, you can do that as well, or you can plug a microphone in if you'd like to sing through this. It might actually sound pretty good, but it is very much designed for acoustic instruments. I'm thinking things like acoustic violins too. That's probably going to be a really good shout. Or rather electric violins. Either way, we have, like I say, these 2 inputs with 2 channels that are slightly different to each other. They're broadly the same. Channel 1 has a tone button and a 3-band EQ, whereas channel 2 doesn't have a tone button but does have a high-pass filter, which is going to enable you to roll off some low end. Again, I feel like this has upright basses in mind, or even acoustic basses, because sometimes that low-end rumble is going to be just a little too much for this amp, and it might make feedback a problem, and maybe it's going to get a little bit flubby with the extreme lows. That is a helpful thing to have. The tone control, it's just going to shape your acoustic guitar sound. It's maybe going to push the highs and the lows a little bit and just make things sound a little bit more, perhaps a little bit more kind of studio shiny maybe. I will say, however, that this amplifier is not really a hyped hi-fi sounding amp. It's very honest and very authentic sounding. So it's really not like your typical kind of like super high fidelity, hyped trebles, hyped bass kind of experience. It's really warm and really kind of full sounding. I just want to explore the sound of that tone control real quick. So what I'll do is I'll play a little bit and I'll just knock this on and off as we go and hear what difference it makes to the sound. So the difference is quite subtle, but there's a little bit of mid-range sculpting going on there. And with this particular guitar, I feel like it's a little more pleasant with the tone control engaged. However, if you have a more all-singing, all-dancing preamp, or you're using something like a Fishman Aura or something to that effect into the front end of this, you can always disable that and get a much more flat response. Now, the treble, middle, and bass controls are all boost and cut, and they're center notched. So when they're in the center position, there's a little notch there, and that is going to enable you just to kind of find a neutral point and dial from there. I don't feel like we need to do too much tonal adjustment to make our acoustic sound nice, but let's just explore what they do. So the effect of these tone controls is quite subtle, but if you have an instrument that's less than perfect, you can start dialing that and really get some powerful results. This guitar, like I say, sounds great straight out of the box, but if there's an awkward mid-range frequency, you can notch that out with the mid control, and it's not going to sound too unnatural. If, for example, you're playing jazz guitar, which is quite a common thing with AER amplifiers, and therefore should work pretty well with this one, you can roll out some treble rather, and get that really kind of like nice warm sound. And if you need a little bit of low end oomph, you can dial that in with the bass control, and it's not going to sound too unnatural. I'm not going to do too much of that though, because I'm sat pretty close to this amp and we are in danger of feeding back if we do that. Now moving on to the effects section, the second channel, I should point out as well, is going to sound identical to that first channel. Of course, it doesn't have the tone button and it has a high pass filter in its place. We're not going to worry too much about that because it's going to give you pretty much the same results. The effects section, like I say, it has three rather simple controls. We've got a level, a pan control, which I'll explain in a moment, and then this three-way rotary switch. I am going to say just slight criticism that these really attractive kind of atomized knobs, they look great, but on this rotary control, it's actually quite difficult to get a hold of it and turn it. It's not an impossible task by any stretch of the imagination, but I can imagine in the heat of a gig with sweaty fingers, that may be an issue. But even still, we have three types of reverb. We've got kind of a long haul reverb, which sounds like this. Which is just gorgeous. I've been using that for this whole review so far, but we have a slightly shorter reverb on tap here. Which is more sort of like a small venue or perhaps a really nice treated recording room. And then we have a third reverb, which is very, very short indeed. For this one, I'm gonna have to turn the mix quite a way up for you to hear it, but it definitely does add something. So this is without the mix engaged. And then I'll turn it up quite high. So that's more like an early reflections kind of sound, which is just going to add a little bit of liveliness in a dead sounding room. So if you're in like a living room or a furnished environment that sounds really, really dead, and you want just a little bit of kind of acoustic life, you can use that reverb for that one. We also have three different delay settings, and this is just different delay times. Now there isn't a control to kind of dial these in, so there's not a tap tempo or any of that stuff. It's just three settings, but there are different lengths. The delay sound is the same for all of them, but it's a really nice kind of organic sounding delay. Sounds like this. I'll just knock that up a tiny bit. Sounds like this. Then the next setting is the same with a different time. And then once again, the same delay with a different time. And of course, we've already discussed the level control, but the pan control is quite interesting. This is another center notched control, and this is going to enable you to bias how much effect is on each of the channels. So there's not really stereo operation going on here, although there is a stereo DI output and a stereo line output on the back, which will give you some stereo width on the reverb and the delays. But rather, this pan control is for controlling how much of the effect goes to which channel. So we're plugged into channel 1. If I turn the pan all the way to the left, we'll get quite a lot of our reverb effect. Which makes me very happy. And then as we turn things across to the center, we should have the same amount of reverb, or near enough. And that would be the same in both channels now, but as I turn it across to the far side, we're going to get no reverb in channel 1. If we had something plugged into channel 2, there would be lots of reverb on there, like this. So this gives you the capacity to essentially send the effects to one channel and not the other. So if you were playing with a bass player, you had an acoustic bass plugged into channel 2, and you were playing your guitar into channel 1, you could turn the pan control all the way over here, so you would get all the reverb, and there would be no sloppy sounding reverb on your bass, which is a really nice feature. Now around the back, we have 2 XLR DI outputs. There's an effects loop for plugging in your own send and return effects. There's also line outputs on jacks, and there's even a foot switch output for controlling the effects, which is going to be pretty useful in a live performance environment. I should also say that even though this is an analog amplifier and it does have an extra large transformer for additional thump and power, it's actually not crazy heavy. I was a little concerned about this when I was reading the spec sheet, because you traditionally associate Class AB traditional amplifiers with large transformers with being very, very heavy and burdensome. This is absolutely not the case. And it also comes with a really cool padded gig bag, which is going to let you take this to and from whatever venue you happen to be playing in. It's a really nice sounding product, and of course the cool thing about it is because it's so organic and not crazy hyped, it just makes the playing experience that little bit more pleasant. I was turned on to the idea of acoustic amps by one of my students a few years ago, and I really can't see the benefit. If you're perhaps scratching your head and wondering, well, I have an acoustic guitar, why would I need an amplifier for it? You really got to try it. It just brings the acoustic guitar to life a little bit, having some form of amplification. It really does let you lean into the feedback that you get and the interaction between the amp and the guitar. And this is a really fine example of that. So there you go, guys. This is the Udo Roesner Da Capo 75 acoustic amplifier. My name is Nick Jennison for Guitar Interactive Magazine, and I'll see you next time.